There were two of us doing one session.
Well, I think we're pretty good here. We're three after
Yeah,
the hour. We don't want to keep you too long.
yeah.
I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Scott McCallum to get going.
Yeah. Let's get started. And first of all, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this 4th of July week. We weren't sure what to anticipate. We had, as many of you know, we had a great turnout for our first session, for our inaugural session. On this one, what we thought we'd do, we've got a couple of things for the program today. And we'll keep it tight, knowing everybody's busy. But first of all, I just thought I'd reiterate what our mission is and what WisACT is all about. It's a cross-partisan organization in Wisconsin for Wisconsin residents that promotes values fundamental to our democratic republic, including fair, safe, and uh, and secure elections and support for civil engagement. So overall, we're, while we're looking at democracy, we want to focus on one of the institutions and make sure that our elections are safe, secure, and that our discourse is civil in society. We recognize that people in this and throughout the state, and the beauty of a democracy is to have different opinions, to differ on issues, and have a civil debate, but then come together in a democracy. And that has been the strength of our state. It's been the strength of our country. And strong democracies have that ability to disagree, but then come together to move forward. As we heard last week, or as our first session, there is a breakdown or a deterioration of what is happening in some of the institutions that are breaking down the civil discourse and harming a faith or a trust in the system itself, in the institutions that we have. Uh, this organization was formed partially to try to change that trend. There are some specific steps everyone can take to help that. And I know all of us think, well, what can I do as an individual? Well, what we can do as an individual is a lot when we come together as a group of people. So with that in mind, um, in these steps, if you're looking to help in ways beyond participating in this, which is valuable in itself, understanding the system, hearing what's going on, be informed in a democracy, but in particular, if you want to volunteer and take that next step, we will soon have petitions available on our website that you can run off and circulate. The goal is to build a large number of people throughout the state of Wisconsin that are standing up and say that they back the five basic principles that you can see on the website, uh, back our institutions. In effect, I know many of us agree that our hope, but also think the vast majority of Wisconsinites and the vast majority of Americans want our system to work. And we know there's going to be different ideas, but we believe in our institutions and democracy and want it to work. And what we hope to be able to do is say, look, there are other people that feel the same way. Let's stand up and be public about it. And to have a large number of people in every community throughout the state that can do that. Now, with that in mind as well, we're going to be doing not only these programs, um, and by the way, David will talk later about you may have suggestions and things you'd like to know further as well, or that you're hearing that we ought to be discussing in the monthly gatherings. Because this, well, David and I have to put these things together. Um, it's really an organization of Wisconsinites,
Yeah.
and it's only as strong as the people that are on this, people that are participating, and the people that are willing to do something to stand up for democracy. Um, so we've outlined those, but some of the things we're doing as well. We're going to have listening sessions around the state, and I'll get to that in just a moment. Um, we are going to do informal coffees in many communities, and we're building hopefully a statewide organization that will reach into every corner of the state, enlisting people to stand up and at the very least to say they support democracy. With that in mind, there are different things, as I say, circulating petitions. We already have some volunteers as regional directors in Wisconsin. And in fact, we may, David, have for our next program just a quick introduction of what two people are doing as co-directors of the Green Bay region in building, where we'll have team captains and others that will just let us know what is going on in the community, share with others, have perhaps participate in some of the events there, but also help build when we put together the listening sessions and the coffees. So keep that in mind. Do what you think you can to stand up, or we hope is a broad base of Wisconsinites. So what we'd like to today, what I'm going to do is introduce Dr. Michael Ford, who is with the Whitburn Center. In fact, he's the director of the Whitburn Center of at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh. The Whitburn Center is working with WisACT and the Carter Center to do independent study of listening to people throughout Wisconsin, several different sessions in different communities to provide an overall report and in-depth. It's not just polling. I mean, it's trying to get an in-depth feel of the sense of what people are thinking in the state of Wisconsin. And that will culminate with a couple of further in-depth training sessions and reports that will be presented. And again, open to the public for people that want to participate and learn more what's going on. So with that, I'd like to introduce, and I'm going to add one other thing is because we've been asked this, including at our kickoff, and I'm negligent. It's surprising somebody in the business I had been in hesitated to ask if you want to donate. It's not required, but we have a donate button on our website now. You can have a tax deductible donation. Presently, it's going through, we're running it through, it comes to WisACT, but it is, you get your donation through the Carter Center. So the donate button will go through the Carter Center, which will be your tax deduction, and then it will be allocated to WisACT for the specific projects we're working on, including an important project. And you can also go directly to the Whitburn Center website to donate for this project, which is the listening sessions. That I'd like to introduce a colleague of mine, person who got his PhD in the state of Wisconsin, is chair of the political science and public administration, I believe, department at the University of Wisconsin in Oshkosh. As I mentioned, is the director of the Whitburn Center, which does research specifically on local governments. So they've done a number of projects in the state of Wisconsin, and I know Dr. Ford's research has included a number of other states, specifically on local governments, school boards, county boards, and how they function and how they can be more efficient in functioning. So with that, Dr. Ford and Mike, could you go and share your thoughts on as you're putting together the listening sessions around the state?
Hey, Scott, if I can just jump in real quick in front of Mike, sorry to interrupt. Keep an eye on the chat. We're going to be giving you information throughout the chat, in the chat throughout the meeting. The donate button, for example, is in there now. We just introduced Allison Keeley. Allison's on the call today. She's our state coordinator, UW-Madison grad student. We're super excited to have Allison. She's awesome. And if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand using the React button at the bottom of the page. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
No, all good, David. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for participating in this important effort. As Scott said, my name is Michael Ford. I am a professor of public administration at UW-Oshkosh. I am the coordinator of our Masters of Public Administration program. We have about 600 alumni out there working in state and local government primarily. So we like to think we're pretty connected to what's going on the ground in Wisconsin. I'm also the director of the Whitburn Center. You can read about the Whitburn Center, but really we're an applied research center. Our basic mission is showing that we can still govern in Wisconsin. And we start that at the local level. So As was stated, we are contracting, the Whitburn Center is contracting with this effort to conduct 5 listening sessions and 2 public education sessions on elections and civic engagement here in Wisconsin. We're guided by a pretty simple and direct research question that ties to WisACT, which is how can public support for fair, safe, and secure elections and increased democratic engagement for all be improved in Wisconsin? So we went back and forth on how to do these listening sessions, and we're calling them listening sessions, but they're really focus groups. What we want to do is get an idea of what community leaders think are the most pressing issues in their communities, what they think about election security, misinformation, barriers to increased civic engagement. So we're holding 5 of these sessions. We've completed the first one. We have one next week, but we're targeting Oshkosh, Milwaukee, Madison, Green Bay, and Eau Claire. Each of these sessions is 2 hours long. It's a moderated discussion where we ask all kinds of questions and really just try to get people talking. 5 to 9 people per session. I will give a shout out here that we completed Oshkosh. We are all booked for Milwaukee, but if you are interested in participating in Green Bay, Madison, or Eau Claire, or you know someone who is a community leader that might be interested, please do reach out to me, and I can put my email address in the chat box, so we do still have some spaces available. But to give you an idea of who's been attending these sessions, who attended the first one, and who's coming to the ones in Milwaukee and Madison, we've had state legislators, city administrators, labor leaders, political advocates from both right-leaning and left-leaning think tanks, nonprofit foundation leaders, journalists, a district attorney, a representative from the League of Women Voters. And that gives you an idea of the type of people we're trying to get here. It really is a grass tops type effort. And the whole point of these sessions is to take what we've learned and apply them to these 2 public training sessions where we're going to utilize some local speakers, some experts around election security, like municipal clerks, et cetera, and use some Carter materials and other materials produced by other organizations around civility and engagement to really produce an all-day program, one in Milwaukee and one in Madison, that's targeted directly to what the people in these communities are telling us they need, the questions that are coming up. And to give you an idea of what we learned in the first one, we had a great conversation in Oshkosh. The level of concern about violence in and around the election is really high. I think we all know that. That's why we're part of this effort, but it still was kind of jarring to hear it. Certainly a lot of concerns about growing incivility. Also not surprising, but it is fascinating to hear people on different sides of the political aisle all express those common concerns. And really this pressing need to educate communities about how elections actually work. There's so much misinformation out there. And again, all these folks in different positions all really hit on those common themes. And there's more to it, and we've had recordings of it, and we have multiple note takers. So I really think we're going to keep learning a lot. But that's really the broad overview of what we're doing, and really excited to be part of this effort and to produce some programming that's really tailored to what the experts on the ground are telling us they need. I'm happy to answer any questions or share more if people have questions.
Before we get into the questions, I'm just going to interrupt for one moment because there's somebody I'd want to introduce as well. I see former Supreme Court Justice Louis Butler has joined us. He's one of the honorary chairs of the project. Justice Butler, thank you, and thank you for the work you're doing and have done for us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thanks for sharing that note, Kristen. Yeah, the voter intimidation. That's not a bad one, or not a good one, excuse me.
Any questions for Mike? We're excited about working with Whitburn. I had an opportunity to work with Mike when I was editorial page editor of the Journal Sentinel, and he would send these great op-eds in that, we're trying to focus on best practices in local government, which we were all about because we were focused on solutions journalism at the time. So I always liked hearing from Mike Ford. Now it's a pleasure to be able to work directly with him.
Feelings mutual, David.
Super cool.
Before we move to our headliner today, Nathan from Carter Center, I wanted to just take a moment and tell you about a few things that we have going on in the coming days and weeks. First of all, and I'm going to drop these in the chat as well, we are co-hosting with the Milwaukee Rotary a meeting next week in which we'll have top election officials from around the state talking about, um, you know, the election that's coming up, and I think reassuring people that it will be safe and secure. We have Megan Wolf, the election commissioner from the state. We have the local election commissioner in Milwaukee, Paulina Gutierrez, and we have Kathy Bernier from Keep Our Republic, which is an organization that's done a lot of work in educating the public about elections. You can register at the link that I sent there. If you're a Rotary member, you can just show up, as Steve Chevalier knows, but if you're not, there is a charge, and you can do that there. At the end of the month, we have an event in Kenosha with a group called Urban Rural Action that's doing something very similar to what we're doing. Urban Rural Action has a cohort of people in several southern Wisconsin counties that are working to just do trainings and sort of talk about building trust in their communities. And so we're excited to work with them. That event will be at the Civil War Museum in Kenosha on July 27th from 1 to 5. And then the third event that we have scheduled is with Leader Ethics, a group that's run by Lee Rosh, who is a former tech college president in Western Wisconsin, now runs Leader Ethics, a group that works to build trust in leadership positions all over the state. This is in Madison at Madison College, and that's an in-person event. And again, the link there, if you're in that area and want to attend, we'd love to have you. We're also working on some additional events that we'll let you know about as time goes on. But one of them we're quite excited about, which we hope to pull off, is a virtual event with election officials and experts where people can ask anything. It'll probably be a combination of an in-person audience and then a virtual event in addition. So those are some things that are coming up. And Scott, is there anything else to add to that before we move to Nathan?
So as you can tell, it's a busy schedule, but again, back to volunteers, we can't, we need to split the state up. And there may be other speaking engagements and things where people that are participating today may want to let us know and perhaps speak yourself at some of these, or we can find local speakers for you.
The other two things I'd mention real quick is our next member meeting is July 31, Wednesday, July 31. We'll have a program there for that meeting. We will let you know what that is. We had planned to have Charles Franklin from Marquette University Law School poll. Charles, however, is presenting a brand new Marquette poll that same hour. And so he won't be with us that month, but he will be with us in August, on August 28th. So we will get back to you with our programming for July 31. And Steve Chevalier, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, David. Dr. Ford mentioned in chat that that report will be available when it's ready. How will we get access to that is my question.
Yeah, so we will post it on the Whitburn Center website, but obviously we'll send it to David and Scott so they can send it to the entire group. If that works for you guys, Scott and David,
Yep.
To put that on you, but I think that makes the most logical sense.
Now we'll figure out how to post it on our website as well.
We'll
And
probably, when they're posted, we'll probably link it for the report.
yeah, and we're going to release
well.
it to the media as well. And so we hope to get a little coverage on it when it comes out. Any other questions about upcoming events or Mike or the upcoming Packers season? Well, we'll do a separate event on that. I'm pretty excited. I don't know about you.
And I see we have a question on whether we have any events around the RNC. We do not. We had talked about having that. We work with a number of other organizations that may not have the exact same mission we do, but have similar type things. And it was mentioned in the chat about Braver Angels. We work with Braver Angels. We work with Keep Our Republic. Several of others have been mentioned here today. So there's a loose-knit coalition. We're not fighting each other, we're supporting each other. So that is covered. And we did cover another event, David and I, with a group geared more for young Republicans in Detroit a couple of weeks ago. So again, we're trying to cover both sides of the aisle, and we're finding, as you know from this group, supporters that, as we say, are differing ideologically, and some, as we know, even some of the people who want to be regional directors have asked not to be identified. They're in nonpartisan office, and they don't like the identification of being partisan, even though they may have feelings. Feel free to do that as well. The bottom line is we all agree on the support of democracy and allowing our system to work.
David, this is John Frankie. You asked about questions on the website under events. The only thing I see is this meeting today. Is there something coming up in Milwaukee besides the Rotary event next week, which I will be at?
No other Milwaukee events planned at the moment. Although, as Mike pointed out, we are going to do a listening session in Milwaukee, date and time to be determined. And
July 9th. Or which, David, so the closed listening session, the invite only, that's next week. That's July 9th, 9 to 11. But then it'll be in the fall when we have the public training session.
Right. And the public workshop that Mike mentioned, we intend to have at least one and hopefully two, and one of those would be in Milwaukee.
David, you want to introduce Nathan?
I'd love to. So Nathan presented at our first meeting, Nathan Stock, who is the associate director of the conflict resolution program at the Carter Center. The Carter Center program that we're all involved with on this call is really Carter's first venture into the United States. Carter has for over 40 years worked abroad doing conflict resolution and developing incredible expertise in peace building and in many other things across the world. Nathan has been a big part of that. He worked for a decade abroad in Jerusalem and in Afghanistan doing that really hard work, and has brought that expertise to the United States in this program, which he designed. And so this is the second part of Nathan's presentation on polarization and how we got there. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more today about what we can do about it. So Nathan, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, Scott. Great to be back with all of you today. Great to see some familiar faces. David, am I correct that we have until 1 o'clock? We have the rest of the hour?
You do.
Right.
And we can go a bit beyond if the group can hang in there.
Okay. Well, I'm going to throw a lot at you in a short amount of time. And I think in the interest of time, I'm going to wait on a Q&A toward the end because I do want to get the main points out, and we will have some time to discuss. For those who joined the previous call where I explored how it is that we became polarized and the particular factors that have driven the upsurge in political violence that we've seen in the last few years, I told you that that was the depressing part. And if you tuned in again for this session, you would get to the more uplifting part. So here we are. This is the good news, or at least as good as it gets in 2024. So you may recall, last time I started off with this graph that lays out from a series of surveys conducted by Pew from 94 to 2017, the ways in which Americans have sorted in their political views, the way in which party affiliation, whether one identifies as a Republican or a Democrat, by 2017, when this last survey was conducted, pulled away from other aspects of our identities. In this case, race, religious attendance, education level, gender, etc. And I said that, arguably this graph sort of summarizes in one picture the ways in which we've sorted into these partisan tribes. I am starting today with this graph again because 1994 wasn't that long ago. I mean, I started college in 1994. It wasn't that long ago, right? The point I want to make here, and I think many in this audience are old enough to remember, this change that has happened in American life is relatively recent. It's relatively recent, right? It's the first point I want to make. Second, this graph charts votes in Congress, votes by members of Congress, members of the House and Senate, against their ideological leanings, whether they're Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative. And it is a proxy for thinking about the extent to which members of Congress from 1879 to 2007 were or were not ideologically polarized. And what you see here in stark relief in the first half of the 20th century is this convergence. Arguably, this is a metric for declining polarization, where Republicans and Democrats increasingly voted in a similar way, despite ostensible party difference. And then you see this sort of bottoms out around World War II, and then the polarization we now know and love today, really starts to pick up in the 1980s, right? Now, this is not the end all and be all of measurements, but it is a useful metric for thinking about this problem. But the point I want to make here is, look, arguably, this is a proxy for understanding a time in American history when we did depolarize, right? That is part of the story of the first half of the 20th century. That said, there will be a lot of caveats in this presentation. It's going to be hard to do. So this is a quote from Peter Coleman's book. Again, we'll send these slides around. You can treat the slides as something of an annotated bibliography. His book, The Way Out, is quite good on this issue. And as I alluded to last month, I mean, the forces that have come together to put us in this unique moment are bigger than any one of us. So this is a task that I think we all need to approach with some humility. That said, I have a tripartite system for thinking about this problem and what we can do about it. I call it community and country. So think of these as levels of intervention. If you want to work on these problems in your community, in Wisconsin, in our country, think of this as a rough guide to the different ways we can engage. Cousin is just a shorthand for interpersonal engagement. It doesn't have to be your cousin. It could be your coworker, your brother, your dad, your neighbor, right? But there's a slate of things that you can do to reach out across this political divide in more constructive ways that help you understand the other side. That's one level of intervention. Community is just a shorthand for group level work. How do groups come together? A group of people who lean right and a group of people who lean left. What are best practices for bringing two groups together if you want to address some of these issues? We'll talk about that. Finally, country, we'll zoom out at the end and talk about this polarization problem as a national phenomenon and think a little bit about the nature of our democracy and how that feeds into the challenges we're seeing and what we might do to change that. These categories, cousin, community, country, they are not hard and fast, right? The soft skills you'd use when engaging, your uncle who you always get into those Thanksgiving dinner arguments with, those skills are applicable, at these other levels of intervention. But it is a way to break down a complex problem into more manageable chunks. Okay, so next caveat of the afternoon, just remember, and I strongly suspect if you're on this call, you've already had this experience, right? This can be awkward, if not uncomfortable, right? In the world we're in today, in America, in Wisconsin, in 2024, these conversations can be hard. And we need to go into these conversations prepared for that, right? And let me just name that this takes work. Many of us, if you haven't had a lot of training in, say, dialogue methodologies, like human instinct, if somebody says something that makes you angry, is to clap back at them, right? come back hot. And so I just want to note here that as you get into these sensitive interpersonal engagements, all of us, we have these natural physiological reactions that are stress responses when we get upset, right? We have to consciously think about the fact that I'm going to hear stuff. My cousin is going to say stuff that makes me angry. And I'm going to take a deep breath, right? And at some points, it's going to be uncomfortable. Okay, so step one, you've picked a person in your life that you know your politics are different. You want to engage. My first recommendation: humanize yourself. These are my kids. This is Rosie and Charlie. Christmas morning, I heroically put together this pipe fort thing for them because I'm a great dad. I'm sharing this photo just because, you know, my kids are cute. And, you know, if all of you were in a different political space than me, I would want to lead with emphasizing that I'm more than my politics. Yeah, I have certain political views. That's true. I'm on a certain side of the aisle, but I'm also a dad, like a real dorky middle-aged dad. And maybe the person I'm talking to has kids or grandkids, right? Maybe I show some pictures of my kids and they show me pictures of their kids or grandkids or pets, right? Pick a thing. But my point is, don't dive into the hard stuff, right? Find ways to remind the other person that you have these other things in common that in some ways transcend your political views. Second, can I get just a rough show of hands? How many folks on the call have had any kind of training in dialogue, active listening, negotiation, mediation? I'm just curious. Okay, I kind of figured. I'm seeing some hands go up. So what I'm going to share here is nothing I have invented, right? But there are some fairly basic techniques for communicating effectively with people with whom you may profoundly disagree. So first, I would focus on listening. I think it's always nice to, you know, start by not talking and listening to the other person. And I've come up with a few things that I find, you know, always very helpful, right? Some of this is obvious, I'm sure, to all of you. Don't interrupt, don't call names. Practice active listening, right? This is just a simple rhetorical technique where the person you're speaking to says something, they share something about themselves, and you summarize what they said in a phrase. You know, I hear you saying that you're really concerned about crime in our communities, right? It's just a way of showing the other person that you're really processing. You're not thinking about what you're going to say. You're really internalizing what they're saying. Listen to understand. That's going to be a lot of this, right? You're probably not going to change minds, but you can, hopefully, through this process, get to know someone and their views in ways that you didn't beforehand. And also, number 5, pick out the underlying values that the other person is referencing, whether they're explicit or not, and then reflect those back. So in my previous life with the Carter Center, I spent hundreds of hours negotiating with various officials in Hamas, the Palestinian terrorist group, political party. And some of the folks I talked to were, you know, came across as relatively reasonable, and some of them were anti-Semitic, scary ideologues who said things that I found personally quite reprehensible. But my job in those engagements was to try to convince them to do things they didn't want to do. That's why you negotiate, right? And so I couldn't just blast them. That was usually not effective. Instead, I would sometimes have to sift through the things that this person said and pick out something that I could agree with, right? Okay, I hear you saying, and we can all agree that conditions for children in the Gaza Strip are awful, and we need to work on them, right? So you don't have to validate what the other person said. You know, if your cousin is going on a rant about immigrants being rapists and murderers, you don't have to agree with that. But you can say, you know, I hear that you really value security in our country and a concern about the security of our borders. You can say that without necessarily giving credence to other things the person has said that you don't agree with. So there's a whole bunch of stuff you can do here. And to be clear, we don't have a lot of time this afternoon. I mean, you know, if there's interest in getting a fuller training on these kinds of techniques, I mean, that's maybe something we can facilitate. You can spend, 2-3 days getting trained in these skills, but this is just a quick overview. Second, similar to the previous slide, there are some sort of classic techniques for how you then effectively make your case. So you've listened, you've reflected some moral agreement. It's your turn to speak. You have the talking stick. I hear you is a nice way to pivot, to start to share your views. Again, as I alluded to, find things you can agree on if possible and start with those things. And then number 3, this is a super useful technique. Explain how it is that you evolved to hold the views you do. We are all a product of our experiences, everybody on earth, right? And telling the story of why you have a given view on abortion or gun control or whatever helps humanize you and ground your position in lived experience. Again, doesn't mean the other guy, doesn't mean your cousin's automatically going to agree, but it makes it harder to caricature you as some sort of partisan robot or to dismiss your views out of hand. And as you do that, you can try to pull that out of the other person you're talking to. Well, tell me, Uncle Mike, what in your life experience brought you to this point? How is it that you have come to these views? That can be very powerful. Number 5, signal strong feelings. If you know the conversation is getting into a topic that is sensitive for you, if you know you're moving into terrain that maybe makes you angry, right? You get hot under the collar, warn the other person. And listen, I just want to flag that, because of some experiences I've had in my life, these conversations about violent crime, they're really personal for me. Sometimes I get upset. Now, you might still get upset, but the other person will have an easier time understanding your emotional reaction if you give them a little warning. And last but not least, don't assume that in these sorts of engagements you're going to agree, right? This is about sharing, learning, humanizing the other side, at least at the beginning. Okay, so related to that, I would recommend, I think this is something that I bet you everybody on the call can do this. Pick a person in your life that you want to try this kind of engagement with. And don't think of it as a one-off. You don't necessarily have to sign your cousin up for like 5 meetings right out the gate. Maybe don't lead with that. It might sound like too much of a time commitment, but have that first conversation and try to leave open a door, or at least, plant some interest to do it again in a couple of weeks' time. I find, engaging folks in my own life across these political divides, I have found that really useful. And, I would say the purpose of a lot of this is, again, not changing minds, but at least developing understanding and building trust. And look, in 2024, there's a heck of a lot to be said for that. Okay, so I'm going to sort of keep speeding through this, and we'll have a little bit of time for discussion at the end. Zooming out a little, think about the group level, groups of people, folks in Milwaukee, folks in Madison, folks in Fond du Lac. It's always important to find ways to lift up positive shared group identities. This is something that went around social media after the massacre at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in 2017. This is a version of the logo of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm sure there's plenty of NFL fans on this call, and you know who I'm talking about, right? But they took the top diamond and they replaced it with a Star of David. What's going on here? This was a way for folks in Pittsburgh and, in Southwest Pennsylvania, after this horrible tragedy had occurred, to, on the one hand, remind folks, hey, we've got other things in common. We're Steelers fans. Oh, and beyond that, we're saying that this horrible tragedy that just occurred, this horrible thing that just happened, this isn't about us. it is beyond the pale of our community. We have these values, we have this shared identity, and that is way outside the bounds, right? So first thing I'd recommend, and you can, maybe we'll have a separate call to talk about the Packers season, right? But like, pick a thing. Maybe it's the Packers, maybe it's fried cheese curds, beer and brats, right? Think about things, even if it might sound a little corny, that you can lift up as things that folks in Wisconsin have in common, have a fond association with, and that don't push people's identity buttons around politics. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but just suffice it to say, for decades now, there's been research into what's known as intergroup contact theory. So, this goes back to research on racial divides, right? And, what are the conditions in which, say, a group of Black Americans and white Americans can come together and have a positive interaction and some kind of positive outcome over time, and, hopefully reduce stereotyping, increase trust. And the short version of this is, yes, contact between groups can be positive, but you have to set yourself up for success, right? And this table just summarizes different social science research around these techniques. But there's, the basic ideas here are, this can also go badly, right? Like if you have groups of very unequal status, where there are significant power differentials, maybe it's a labor management thing, maybe it's just differences of wealth, right? Then contact between two groups can actually exacerbate dislike or distrust or whatever, right? So think about groups that are somewhat equal in status, right? There are still church spaces or religious institutions that can work well for this. There are, religious congregations that are politically heterogeneous, where you have, some mix of folks who lean left and right, but they otherwise have obvious things in common, right? They have perhaps a shared faith tradition, and maybe somewhat similar socioeconomically, right? So think about that. Also, common goals, which we'll talk more about in a minute. But getting groups together to do a shared task can be a nice starting point. Okay, and that gets into my next point, which is, if you're thinking about target groups, these could be, people in an office setting, a religious congregation, maybe it's members of a Rotary Club. You don't have to start with the hard stuff, right? You don't have to dive into a debate about gun control. Do a project together. There's research in that book I highlighted by Peter Coleman, where he talks about the benefits of going on walks together. Apparently something about two people going on a walk syncs up our biorhythms and just makes it easier for us to listen to one another, have fun, right? And relatedly, work with what's there, right? In my experience, in most American communities, even now, there are still institutions that do bring people together across our political divides. Wherever possible, work within those spaces. It'll just make your work easier. And again, it gives you some hopefully common reservoir of shared identity and trust that you can build upon. And then, and this is, a key to the strategy through which we brought all of you together, cultivate leaders with credibility, right? This is why we invited you to be in this network. Pick people, reach out to people, build relationships with people who hopefully are listened to by others, right? You can have a multiplier effect in that way. And as you go, always be looking for opportunities to strengthen positive norms. This, again, is critical to the underlying theory behind this project, but the creation of WisACT and our networks in other states. We want to set the expectation that there are these basic standards of behavior that everyone in our society should agree to, and that frankly most people do, right? So look for opportunities to get groups of people, ideally mixed groups of people, liberal, conservative, black, white, urban, rural, whatever, to lift up shared messages around these values that we hold in common, and work to move groups of people together. Part of my foundational inspiration for this designing of this project was research on female genital mutilation, public health, behavioral change interventions to eradicate this horrible practice. And reading a book on the subject, this researcher argued that, you know what, if you go into village X where this practice occurred, and if you can convince all the elders in the village, who are, all older guys, right, that this thing that we've done to our daughters and granddaughters for however long is bad, and that as a group, everybody, all the leaders should come out together and say we should make a change. That is how you change social norms. That is how you make this cultural practice that had been, conducted since time immemorial. That's how you make it taboo, right? An example of this, which we're going to talk more about with WisACT, is just going back to 2022, the Carter Center and the Ford Presidential Center up in Michigan have been promoting a set of principles for trusted elections. And we'll talk more about this, but the theory is the same. The theory is, hey, look, we are showing that all kinds of citizens from all walks of life expect candidates to abide by these very basic standards. Finally, look for opportunities to promote these values. This is sad to say, but it's true. Crises, and particularly violent ones, can be opportunities that can be leveraged. Think about the horrible example of the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. 168 people, including 19 children, were killed. And it was a wake-up call. And for quite some time in American life thereafter, the kinds of sort of anti-government militia types who were behind that were very much on the back foot. And there was a broad sense in American life across the political aisle that these guys were bad, right? And we'll talk more about this as we get into kind of conflict response planning. Like what does WisACT do? What do we do if there are problems in the next couple months, in the next few months? But we will want to look for opportunities where we can lift up these values, reframe the conversation, et cetera. Last bit I want to share here is just how do we think about this as a national problem? So for those who participated in the conversation last month, I talked about how the comparative political scientists, maybe Mike, I don't know if you're a comparative guy, but you'll appreciate this, right? People who compare different types of systems of government, including different democracies, they will tell you that actually America's system these days doesn't stack up very well, that our system of government, the unique features of minoritarian power, or, the filibusters, an example of minoritarian control, the Electoral College, right? The minoritarian stuff, the fact that we have single member districts. There's a lot about our system of government that, at least for the last few years, is really exacerbating these divisions in our country. It is related to the upsurge in violence we've seen. And so another way to think about the polarization problem is to think about this as a democracy reform problem. How do we make the democracy better? How do we ensure that the voices of the citizens are better reflected in the policy-making process? And I think it's fair to say, these are issues that are deep, that far, far predate the 2016 election, right? Money in politics, gerrymandering, right? There's lots of political science work that's already been done on how hard it is for your median citizen Joe Blow to get legislation that they would like to see passed, right? I'm sure you've all seen this research. 65% of Americans agree on lots of hot button policy issues, and yet it's very hard, especially at the federal level, to move for reasons that I think this group's probably familiar with. So all I want to say here is think about these reform questions. This slide is a bunch of links to websites and orgs that work on these different issues. If you don't want to have that awkward conversation with your cousin, that's fine. Go volunteer with the Abolish the Electoral College people. Okay, I'm almost done here and we'll have a little bit of time for discussion. It's impossible to talk about this polarization question without also talking about demographics. So part of this, the blue line here is the same blue line from one of the earlier slides where we showed how, how votes in the House of Representatives converged for quite some time and then began to diverge across ideological lines as a metric, a proxy for understanding polarization. Same blue line is here. The red dots are the percentage of the population of the United States that's foreign born per the US Census Bureau. And I'm sure I suspect this is a group that knows our US history pretty well, right? In the early 20th century, we restricted immigration. So the percentage of the population that was foreign born dropped dramatically in the early 20th century. And then, of course, began to rise in the 60s and 70s after the reforms of the Johnson administration. Correlation is not causation, of course, right? Mike, I don't want to get in trouble. But there's a thing here, right? And as I talked about in last month's presentation, there's a whole body of social science research now that's looking at immigration or the fear of immigration as a force that is animating authoritarian backlashes against democracy across most democracies, right? So this is not in any way unique to the United States, but it's something we have to wrestle with. It is a piece of this story of what's going on in our country. So what that tells me is we got to think about the elephant in the room, which in America is, slavery and all the unresolved legacy of that, right? And there's no easy answer to this. I would argue that the US needed to have in 1870 a kind of national truth and reconciliation process, which we never really did, right? And here we are. So all I want to suggest here, because these issues are bigger than any of us on this call, right? But there are initiatives out there. For example, the Kellogg Foundation, click on this link, go on their website, where you can download like a guide to running a local, a county level sort of truth-telling process. The Equal Justice Initiative, the folks who run the Lynching Museum and Memorial down in Alabama, they have a process. I participated in one of these where I used to live in rural South Carolina, where they will give you data. If there was an African-American lynched in your county, they will give you data about the murder. And if you go through a process of community conversation, kind of excavating that history, I participated in one of these with hundreds of people. You can have a monument to the murder planted formally at the site of the crime. These things matter, right? Like there's no silver bullet to this, but these are the kinds of things that can help address some of these really challenging issues in the history of our country. Last thing I want to say, last slide, I appreciate everyone's patience. As you embark on everything I have just described, it's going to be hard and things are not always going to go smoothly. Again, we can get more into this if you wanted to do like a longer training on dialogue or conflict resolution, but there are some tried and true techniques for how to manage the difficulties you'll hit. Pause and reflect is the first one, right? You're in that hard conversation with your uncle. You feel yourself getting angry, or maybe you're starting to clap back at him. Pause and reflect. Return to the big picture. Like you got to tell yourself, all right, you got to be conscious of it. I'm getting fired up. I'm going to take a deep breath and I'm going to remind myself why I'm here. What are we doing? I'm trying to better understand Uncle Mike, even if he makes me angry sometimes, right? Write the other person's story. We talked a little bit about that. Separate interest from the positions. This is a classic, right? I've highlighted below Roger Fisher and Bill Urey's book, Getting to Yes. I mean, this is from the 70s in its first edition, right? The idea is that what people say is not always what they need. And that doesn't mean they're lying. It just means they may be locked into a way of articulating what they want. And so, if you get into this and it gets more advanced, let's say you're 4 meetings in with your cousin and you do start to, want to find common ground, or maybe you come in his direction a little, or he comes in your direction a little, look for the things that underlie what people say and build off of that. Write the victory speech. Think about how you could both frame an agreement as you kind of move into negotiations, right, as something that allows people to save face, right? If you do get to a place where someone is changing their views, that can be really sensitive, right? Nobody likes to admit they were wrong, God forbid, right? So think about ways that both sides can see that, yes, I've made a concession, I moved, I changed my mind, I'm wrong, but you can sell that, you can frame it in a way that is a positive, that fits into their wider identity and worldview in a way that's not harmful. Last but not least, have grace. Have grace for yourself as you dive into all this. Have grace for whomever it is you're talking to across these divides. This is really hard. And I don't want the takeaway from all this, as I've laid out how challenging this is, I don't want the takeaway to be, we have to throw up our hands, there's nothing we can do. Absolutely not. I do not believe that. I do believe that because this is hard, that is a reason to be as patient and kind as we can with all of our fellow Americans as we try to get through this. So let me stop there. I know we're at time. I don't know, David, if you want to take a little more time to discuss.
Yeah, let's take a little more time. We have one question in the chat from Mark Schwartz. He says, one of the things that I have noticed in the current political discourse environment, especially as a result of the pandemic, is that appeals to the concept of the so-called common good are no longer useful or effective. Has this happened in the past, or is this a unique aspect of things as they have become recently?
That's a great question, Mark. I don't think I know the history enough to give you a full answer. It is certainly much harder to do that today than it was in 1942. Much harder. But I don't think it's a bad idea. I think, I mean, shoot, like, look at the issues facing our country, right? Healthcare costs are still through the roof, housing costs, life expectancy is dropping in parts of our country, right? Like, there are so many issues that negatively impact the vast majority of Americans, the vast majority, that have nothing to do, that transcend our politics or our race or what have you. So I think that's an important starting point. I think, lifting up the shared needs of the people in this country is one of the things you have to do, even if it is hard today in our partisan echo chambers.
Other questions? Feel free to jump in. I would just add to what Nathan just said is that I've been working on this in just a very short time, and certainly I'm no expert, but in the 6 months or so I've been going around the state talking to people. What I have been very encouraged by is that just like everyone on this call today, the vast middle of the state really wants a better environment for our political discussion, for our politics, and they want to work on building trust again, because all of us, I think, of a certain age, remember that it didn't used to be this way, and it doesn't have to be, and we don't want to normalize this kind of behavior in our sort of political discourse or politics. But other questions, and Scott, do you want to jump in?
Discussion, questions. I'm just going to add as well that if people want to contact either Dave or I, and I know Lori who's on today, we've been emailing back and forth. There are specific steps. If you have questions, let us know, and we'll try to get back to you.
I would say too, we're looking for ideas for as Scott mentioned earlier, for programming for these monthly meetings. We have some ideas, but we don't want to be the only font of ideas, and we're not. So all of your ideas would be really useful. What do you want to know about? What do you think would be most useful? What kinds of things do you want to do in these meetings? Because as Scott mentioned, this is your group that we're just trying to organize.
Thank you, everyone. Nathan, thank you. Michael, thank you. Dr. Ford. And thank you. It was a larger turnout than we expected over the
Yay.
4th of July week. So thanks so much for participating, and feel free to, if there are other things you think you can be doing to help, let us know and we'll get you involved.
Absolutely. We're up to about 240 or 50 members now on our email newsletter list that goes out weekly. And our goal really is to boost that number pretty significantly. So the petition drive that we talked about, if you're interested in that, please let us know. We'll get the petitions to you. You can direct people directly to our website. And those the join button will get you there. And that's basically the petition. And so we would love to get as many people as possible saying it's time for something better. Thanks again. We'll let you know about our next meeting. It'll be July 31 at noon via Zoom. And thanks so much. Good to see all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.